How are y'all doing? This is Left Reckoning Griscom stream. My name is David, broadcasting to y'all live from Austin, Texas. Hope you're doing all right wherever you are at. These are a bit different. It's been a little while since we've done one of these streams, and I'm sorry. It's been kind of busy, kind of nuts past few weeks, as y'all know. Very happy to be here and, take some questions, chat a little bit. I mean, obviously, there's a lot going on. We can talk politics, talk the DNC, talk where we're at in this moment. I think it's a little bit of a difficult situation that we're finding ourselves in. Think, frankly, just more than anything, kind of clarifying moment. But we can get into all of that. Before we do, just a couple of quick things up top. Please throw those questions into the chat. It really helps us out a lot. So we appreciate super chats very much, but also I'm happy to take questions from anybody. Just please at Left Reckoning in it, because once this gets going, it gets a little hard for me to catch all those questions. So make sure that I'm able to see it by doing that for me. And also, folks, if you missed it, we had a really great conversation on Tuesday with our good friend Elias on what's going on in Chicago on the ground. Obviously, a few updates there. But it was really nice hearing from him. Matt and I also talked a bit more in depth about the Democratic Socialist movement and where it's at. And in the post game, you get access to that patreon.com/Left Reckoning. Matt had a very in-depth breakdown of Russell. Jesus Christ. Why can't I remember his name right now? That's kind of embarrassing. Rusty Rockets. Lord help us all. I literally can't remember his name, but y'all know. Right, I'm just gonna move on. I don't know why I can't remember his name. The actor from Get Him in the Greek. I never was a big listener of his, but anyways, Matt has a really in-depth breakdown of his most recent kind of breakdown of. Sorry, I'm losing my mind a little bit. Russell Brand, thank you so much, Autumn Leaves. Russell Brand, it was freaking me out a little bit that I couldn't remember that. Anyways, Matt had a very deep breakdown of Russell Brand's most recent detective work. And it was a lot of fun. So you want to be able to catch that patreon.com/Left Reckoning and get there. But without further ado, and without me getting more and more confused, remembering washed up actors from the mid 2000s, I'd be very happy to chat a little bit. So I know we have a few questions in there, so I'm going to take some. Again, please at Left Reckoning, and we can look into these kind of things. So first up, and thank you so much from our friend Byron Man. He says, do you think Kamala will wait until after the election, or is she going to Hubert Humphrey the decision to split with Biden? I'm assuming and I appreciate the chat very much. I'm assuming we're talking about trying to make a move on Gaza. I mean, I think, in all honesty, trying to make long-term predictions, can be a little bit dangerous, just because I think that, a lot of this is going to depend on what's happening with the movements on the ground here in this country, and also what's happening internationally. I think that right now the intention from Kamala Harris is to maintain the status quo while being able to sort of present some kind of hope to folks out there. A lot of people in the progressive movement have made it fairly clear that they'll play along with that game and continue sort of trying to run cover for her and acting like little crumbs or little signals or whispers are actually indicative of serious policy shift. Meanwhile, what's happening in Gaza continues to get worse. I mean, it's really unconscionable. What we've been seeing from the Democratic Party, and we can talk a little bit about this demand to have a Palestinian speak at the DNC, which is too much for that party, too much for them. but so whether or not she's going to make any kind of shift, I mean, she either will be forced to, and we'll have to see, and a lot of solidarity with the uncommitted movement, with people who are continuing to put pressure on this campaign. I think it's been a little bit difficult as a lot of people have sort of started to make it clear that they're willing to accept a lot of nonsense from her and her party. That they're willing to accept very little for their kind of endorsement or, in fact, adulation from a lot of folks. So hopefully, the forces are there still that can put some pressure on her to do what's right. But I think that they're making a calculation that if they can just sort of eke it out, for just a little bit longer, they can get to November and not have to deal with the kind of political consequences of that. And I hope that people out there don't let them do that and make it into an issue. But I'm sure there's a lot more on this as we go, and appreciate the chat there, friend. So I'm going to keep going a little bit. Our good friend Rude Street Collectible says, "Who do you think the secret special guest at tonight's DNC is? My money's on George W. Bush. I bet you it's Beyonce." Um, but I'll tell you, thematically, it wouldn't be that surprising if you saw W up there, as they have plenty of space and time for Republicans within the Democratic Party, while having very, very little space or time for Palestinians. Looney Tunes says, "What are your thoughts on RFK dropping out of the president's race? Has he officially dropped out? I know there was conversations about it, um, but I think it's been. I mean, what this must have been. Uh, I mean, the RFK thing has been kind of strange across the board, because I think that that his coalition kind of represents a fairly Trumpian in general, but maybe a kind of like non-voter to infrequent voter group of people in this country. And as we've seen, there has been a decent implication, at least from some of the polling that I've seen, that like he might be pulling more votes away from a Donald Trump. Um, than from a Kamala Harris. And I think that, especially when it comes to some of the Democrats who might have said that they would be voting for him, I think, again, there's a lot of kind of name recognition confusion going on. The fact that his kind of politics have led him to a place where he sees that he has alignment with somebody like Donald Trump, I think shows that, there was always a kind of lack of sincerity to that kind of fringe woo woo, uh, anti big tech, anti big food, whatever they're calling it now, coalition that isn't particularly worried about private control over things, and is just much more based upon a kind of misplaced nostalgia for like the 1950s and 60s, which I think, both from the name and from a lot of the things that they're talking about, is the kind of crux of the Kennedy brand. And look, I think it'll be very telling if he does drop out and tries to get some kind of role within the Trump administration. It's been a very strange campaign from the get go, and it was surprising even seeing some folks in our orbit think that, oh, maybe something's going to happen here. But all right. Thank you, John. John says, keep up the great work, Griscom. Love LR and looking forward to the next merch drop. Thank you. Is FDR the greatest U.S. president in your opinion? Looking forward to dropping our stuff soon. I mean, it would have to be Lincoln in my if I were to give a vote. I mean, FDR did a lot, and was certainly somebody. FDR, more than anything, I think, was an American politician who had a very unique capability to sort of ride the horse of history, in the sense of seeing the different kind of contradictions and tensions within American society and being amenable to them. I think FDR is interesting, sort of looking at what relationship FDR had to the labor movement, and to some of the more radical undercurrents that were coming up in American society as FDR comes into power. People read my review um, of Mean Things Happening in This Land, um, about Mitchell and the Southern Tenant Farmers Union. It's very interesting to see the role that FDR played in, basically helping, recognizing the movements that were happening in Southern labor, for example. And this is a very particular example, but recognizing the shifts that were happening, the need for there to be stronger protections for working people, the needs for there to be more government intervention to get people out of the depression, um, but also the role that that kind of played in taking a fairly radical movement, um, and moving the energy from the street or the field in that case, into the halls of power, and what that ended up meaning for those movements, in the decades after FDR. I think that that's something that is a different legacy than somebody like Lincoln, whereas like we sort of saw the FDR legacy pushed out, I think, as far as that was going to get pushed out, because eventually the folks and the forces that were able to force FDR into doing what he did for the country, those forces became dissipated by the very fact that they were able to get a lot of the things that they needed and were asking for from FDR. While Lincoln, the great kind of tragedy of American history is the fact that Reconstruction failed, and that Reconstruction was given up on. And I could imagine a very, very different America had Lincoln not been killed, for example, than the America that we got via FDR. So, best president would be Lincoln. Just on that. All right, friends. All right, let's see what we got. All right, friends. Yeah, well, I mean, I'm happy to chat a little bit more. Oh, damn, I don't know what that. Sorry, I'm getting chats from all three of our different groups here, so I should be putting them up on the screen. I apologize. Michael says, as dreadful as things seem, it's still more vibrant and relevant than it was, say, in the mid 2000s or whatever. Like nobody self-identified as a socialist back then, and I tend to agree with that, and appreciate the message there. And Michael adds, other than Bernie, which is very true. Um, but I think that this is something that has been giving me a bit of anxiety, though, because ever since the Bernie Sanders 2020 elections, I think we've been entering into a very dangerous moment on the left, and particularly on the socialist left, because I think that after that defeat in the Democratic Party primary, there's a lot of confusion as about where to go. Um, and where this movement should be going, kind of in this post Bernie moment. And I'll tell y'all what, like on this program, we would title things like "What's next for the Bernie movement" or the post Bernie left, or things like that, and people would get so. I'm talking about like in 2021, right, when we were early doing stuff. People were getting so upset. Oh, what do you mean we're post Bernie now? Blah blah blah. It's like, well, certainly. It's very clear that we are, and just like have to be, because it's very clear that Bernie wasn't going to run again in 2024. So we had to start figuring out what to do. And what ended up happening was a very weird, I think, past few years of politics. Not without victories, and certainly, a lot of successes, kind of trying to galvanize and grow the American labor movement. But still, the reality is that that needs to get much stronger, larger, and more militant to do the things that are necessary to deal with the kind of internal contradictions in American society. So we desperately needed to try to build campaigns and movements that were going to be able to sustain themselves. And I think one thing that has been kind of shocking has been, one, this horrendous moment that we're living through regarding Gaza, um, and seeing the the fact that we aren't where we sort of thought we were going to be at this moment, right? Even if a Bernie presidency seemed like, it might be difficult or hard, it at least felt like something that was attainable. Now we're really far from that, in so many ways, and in fact, we're not only growing in a lot of ways, we're on our back foot, right? You've seen the loss of people like Bowman and Bush. You're seeing lower membership in organizations like the DSA. That part of the movement is very much in decline. And so it's great that we're seeing this revival in the UAW. I think that's very exciting. But as I was saying to Matt, I think that there's a real danger here, where a certain section of people who were very mobilized and motivated to be involved in politics during those Bernie campaigns, and even in the past couple of years, sort of say, "Oh, well, look, the unions are doing it." Well, no, they. It's definitely not at the scale and scope that is necessary, and in fact, they desperately need people to be continuing to show up, and participate in politics on that mass level, right? There's a kind of escapism that's returning. I think you're seeing sections of the progressive movement, the people who might have thought that maybe Elizabeth Warren has a plan and that's super cool. Um, a lot of those people want to be sort of re-embraced into the Democratic Party. I think that's the mainstream of the Democratic Party. That's very clear. And there was a kind of blurry line between, I think, the Democratic Socialist movement and that part of the progressive movement. For a while, that I think many people, maybe on the socialist side, thought that maybe our side was winning because people weren't necessarily running away at the word socialism, and would sort of be in conversation with publications like Jacobin, things like that. But it's very clear that political education wasn't happening, and that battle actually wasn't being won, at least ideologically, at the level that maybe some folks had hoped. So you're seeing a lot of that return back into the Democratic Party, um, mainstream, from a lot of that progressive side, and then also on like the socialist left. I mean, you're seeing a lot of willingness, and I think it's unfortunately that's going to happen at a large scale now, into kind of marginal politics. You'll see that a lot of people are saying, "Oh, it's time now for everybody to get behind the Green Party," and blah blah blah. Which again doesn't that feel very much like a return to the old left of the 2000s? Um, I say all that to just sort of take stock, because I do genuinely agree with you, Michael, that we're more relevant and more organized and more connected than we were in the 2000s, at least, to my understanding, because I was still fairly, I still wasn't even in high school at that point. But, um, I think that we are more vibrant and relevant than we were in that moment. But I do think that there are a lot of signs of maybe a return to the margins again that are very dangerous for the socialist movement. And then I think a lot of maybe some of the friends that we made along the way, those connections might be a little bit more shallow than we had hoped. But um, I don't know. Maybe I'd be very happy to be proven wrong. And I don't think that the project is over or it's done or it's dead. And I like to talk more about how we get out of this moment. But I think that we can't build out of this moment unless we actually take very seriously the kind of critical situation that we're in. Because look, I mean, maybe a generation of a kind of soft progressivism is more beneficial than a return to an old style of neoliberalism, right? Maybe. but I think that it won't be able to do the historic work that is necessary to actually building a working class alternative to politics, um, to like corporate run politics or elite run politics, because all the stuff is still very mediated, um, controlled, influenced by a class that's not particularly comfortable with taking on those kind of fundamental issues in American capitalism or American democracy. But that's enough there. I'll take some more cues from y'all. Our good friend said Byron. Byron, appreciate the chat again. Says, are we really going to have to wait until a 2032 Democrat presidential primary to debate on Medicare for all? Or is there hope the Harris administration could bring it back? Well, I don't think. I mean, there's two questions. Are we going to have to wait till 2032? Or, which is the first question, is like, I don't think we can or should wait for that. But the second question, is there hope that the Harris administration could bring it back? I think Kamala Harris, this is the thing that maybe to reset here. This is the thing that has been extremely kind of confusing and frustrating to me over over this past month or so, since Biden stepped down as the nominee, is there's been like this kind of bizarre memory holding of Kamala Harris's politics. Kamala Harris, let alone, would she maybe support Medicare for all if she became president? She couldn't even maintain support for Medicare for all during the 2020 presidential campaign, when every kind of Democrat in the party was trying to signal that they might be more and more interested in actually doing something significant on healthcare. Remember all those debates? We even had the debate about what Biden's healthcare plan was going to be. And what did we see from Joe Biden on that? Nothing. That, because it was simply put out there to try to neutralize the left, to try to neutralize Bernie Sanders, because most people in this country recognize that it is completely absurd to have our healthcare system run, controlled for the profit of these nasty insurance companies, right? Everybody recognized that. It became like the number one issue within the Democratic Party in that election, or at least was for a time, right? It was the most hotly contested and debated one, at least during the during that campaign. And Kamala Harris couldn't even maintain her support for Medicare for all then. Remember, she said, "Oh, I support Medicare for all," and then she raised her hand. "Oh, I misheard the question. No, I don't support it anymore." Right? So she walked that back. Hell, since she's been running, we've gotten very little from her in her actual platforms and things like that. And I think we're going to get very little, frankly. She's walked back support for the federal jobs guarantee, for all of these kind of things. So, Kamala Harris is somebody who you're going to get less than what's promised. So, no, I mean, I don't think that you're going to be able to get it from Harris. I think that is absolutely critical to not let something like Medicare for all fall out of American politics. It's very likely to do so. It's extremely likely to do so if we all take the lead of the folks who have just jumped onto the Kamala Harris bus, the second that they saw it, right? I think that will kind of guarantee that Medicare for all disappears from American political discourse for a decade, for sure. And I just wanted to just say the last thing, and then I'll get to some of the other questions on that. That used to be like the litmus test, not the litmus test for being like on the socialist side. That used to be the litmus test for being able to call yourself a progressive, was supporting Medicare for all. And now it's completely out the window. It's completely out of the political spectrum. Um, Something that will very much be defined by a Kamala Harris and that wing of the party. The people are celebrating, you'll hear people say things along the lines, basically the tone will be, "Oh, it's so terrible what the Democratic Party is doing to Gaza. I think it's really bad. And it sucks so much because it would be so wonderful if if they would stop supporting the Gaza stuff, because everything else that we're seeing from them is exceptional." And that to me is truly baffling. And I think completely out of touch with what we're seeing. Kamala Harris was rightfully seen by the vast majority of supporters of Bernie Sanders as somebody who had every intention of selling out and attacking and being hostile to the progressive movement. 4 years ago, and in 4 years, she's been a part of this administration, right? And the defining aspect of Kamala Harris that we've gotten so far has been that she's less interested in continuing Joe Biden's labor policies and relationships there. So yeah, I think that Kamala Harris turn on Medicare for all is unlikely. Mm. And Michael adds, and presidential politics probably is not the best haven for the left to be playing in right now. Bernie was a unique opportunity, but unless we get another one, we have to raise class consciousness. And I totally agree with you on raising class consciousness. I think um, it's true. It's something that I used to not necessarily agree with, but it's something that listening to our friend Bhaskar Sankara over the years has sort of taught me. Is like, no, you do need to have a national project, though. You do need to be engaged in national politics. Your movement needs to be seen at the national level. And I genuinely agree with that, and I think that there's a lot of value in trying to play on that stage. Um, I think the problem right now is uh, less so that, like, is the movement strong enough? It's sort of actually looking at, it's like, what is the movement? Where is it? Who's in it right now? Because it's very unclear to me what where everyone's at. All right, I'm slightly behind y'all, so please, if you're just joining us, taking questions, hanging out, talking about whatever, just at Left Reckoning so that I can see it a little bit easier, and I'll get to you as soon as possible. But I appreciate this. I feel bad. It's been a little while since we've done one of these, so I'm happy to sit down and chat for a little bit. All right. Sorry, I'm just trying to keep up. Well, see here. Sorry, I'm trying to make sure that I'm not missing anything. Oh, look, it's my buddy Alex. Alex, how you doing, friend? Alex's thoughts on the origin of Gen Z centrism, thinking about how the return of trends run on that 30-year cycle, and here we are at 90s triangulation again. Yeah, well, I couldn't imagine who you might be talking about, but I don't know. I mean, you Alex probably knows more in depth than I do what's going on there, at least on the political scene. But I I think that we're getting a lot of signals that this younger generation might be a bit more conservative, at least sections of it. Um, I think that a lot of this too has to do with culture, and that kind of culture of, like, being politicized, disappearing. Or weakening. And what I mean by that is that, for a while it was just like, particularly around the Bernie stuff, it was just like, you knew, if you were, if you're my age, right? I'm 30. In my 20s, everywhere from Texas, from Austin to other places I've lived, you just sort of knew that the vast majority of people around you, at least liked Bernie, if weren't uh massive supporters of him. And I think that sort of, like, bled into the culture a bit, along with a bunch of other kind of, um, aspects of, kind of, let's call it, like, identity politics, left wing stuff. That was just sort of that something that was drunk up by a lot of us for like 12, 14 years, right? And I think this generation beneath us, probably having experienced that as both something that was sort of imposed on them and something that might have seemed like less cool, right? Because you're always trying to do something different. I don't know. It might have sort of encouraged a kind of conservative outlook on politics. But that's just me being an old guy, I guess, guessing why things have turned out the way that they have. And I would be curious to see, how that actually tends to develop over the next few years, if that's just something that certain media narratives are sort of making us feel that Gen Z is more centrist than the generations before. Because there's certainly plenty of wonderful Gen Z activists and listeners of this program who maintain fairly radical politics. But I do think that people get politicized very quickly and very extremely. I think I saw that, and I think that sort of cooled down um, and maybe sort of encourage people to be more middle of the road in politics. But I don't know, because there's a few years where like every other person was like a like a furry Maoist or something. And that was also pretty weird when it came to politics. So maybe that's a kind of reaction to some of the excesses from the past 6 years. All right. Good point here. Civilian victim of Havana syndrome says California will probably be forced to do a public option for car and house insurance. And every time that's brought up, we need to stress it should be national and it should include health insurance. Yes, I think that's a good point. Alerta said Vivek Chibber also said that the presidential election is one of the best times because everyone is paying attention. Absolutely, and Vivek Chibber is somebody who people should be reading and listening to if they aren't already. And I think that this is something that like let me talk about the local stuff just really quick because this gives me an opportunity to do it. Because one thing that you see this, like, again, I'm not like a Green Party person, not because I'm against third parties or think that people need to be supporting the Democratic Party, but because the Green Party has shown itself time and time again to be a party that isn't particularly interested in building a socialist party. It's been wanting to be a kind of big tent of political identities and ideologies that have been sort of left out. So, like, yes, some of those folks have been radicals or socialists or whatnot, but also a lot of crankery and a lot of other kind of things. It's also a party that, if you want to talk about issues with internal democracy, right, how the party is run, right, our criticisms of the Democratic Party, Green Party is rife with those as well. So it's just not a political project that I've ever felt like, oh, we need to attach ourselves to a party and that has its own history that we might not be particularly attracted to defending. It's also kind of can be feel off-putting to a lot of folks. I've just never been particularly enamored with the Green Party as the vehicle for building a socialist movement in this country. I just think the Green Party wants to build the Green Party. That's fine. Best of luck to them. But anyways, going back to the Green Party, every time it's presidential election time, you'll get this like, oh, well, why is the Green Party running for office? Because, why is the Green Party running for office? If they're serious, they should just run for local and city and state office, and then, they can run for president one day. First of all, the Green Party does that, right? And a lot of parties do that. Go look at your ballot the next time you vote and see who's running for Senate, and see who's running for um, U.S. Congress or whatever. More often than not, you'll see at the very bottom of your ballot a Green Party candidate, depending on where you live and how active the Green Party is there. But they're all over the country doing that kind of thing. Now, the issues with the Green Party and why it hasn't caught fire, I just it will be too much of a conversation to get into. But like that's always been a kind of weird, cheap argument that you get from folks, right? That's basically more about like, oh, there shouldn't be other kind of parties. There's two main parties. But the other point about the presidency, which is always like, oh, we shouldn't like, chase after these big offices, right? Governorship, Senate, Congress, the presidency. was like, oh, what you should do, this idea that people have is like, to build an actual viable political party in the United States is you run somebody for mayor and you run somebody for mayor in another part of the country. And then you have like 10 mayors all across the country. And then you maybe run for Congress and you have like 2 congressmen. And then that becomes 10, 12. And then maybe you win some Senate seats and then some governor seats. And then you get to be the president, right? You get to run somebody for president. Well, that's not how the political part, any of the political parties that have been mainstream in America came into power, right? The Republican Party, right, which is probably the only one that's like reasonable to talk about how it became a viable national party, came out of a split out of the Whig Party, and also crises amongst the Democratic Party, which was always a kind of catch-all party for a lot of different interests that became so in contradiction with themselves, both within the Whig and the Democratic Party, over slavery, that a new party formation was able to occur. And even within that party, there were multiple different factions within it, right? Between the northern industrialists and like the actual radical Republicans and abolitionists. But the point is that it's not like, oh, the Republican Party just started running for small office, small office, small office, and then boom, they're able to play, at the big table. No, they just went for it, and they were able to take power and take votes away from the other parties, so that they were able to win. Now, that doesn't just happen necessarily if you run somebody for president, and that's not what I'm trying to argue for here. But this kind of like the way you build a political party in America is that you go local, 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 and then you get to play at the big stage is just inaccurate for how any of the political parties have ever developed in this country. And it's also inaccurate if you look at the way that some of the major parties have developed in other parts of the world as well. Right. So it's a kind of like, I understand like the idea of it because it seems like it's a leveling up, right? Level 1 mayor race, level 2 state house race, et cetera, et cetera. But that's just not historically accurate for how you've been able to build political power in other contexts. So it's one of those arguments that tries to make people tries to make reasonable something that is unreasonable, which is saying that like you shouldn't try to build alternative political movements to the shit options that we have right now. All right, let's see. I can take a couple more. Good hearing from our good friend Ange in Australia. What do you mean? You should definitely check out the channel if you're not watching it already. Excellent YouTube channel, and appreciate the super chat, friend. David Russell has probably a better answer for some of why we're seeing so many Gen Z centrists than my rambling one, which is some of them are collecting the bag. But the saddest thing about some of those folks who are quote collecting the bag, Dave, is that I know for a fact that they're not getting as big as a bag as you or I might need to do and say the things that they're doing. Friend here, civilian victim of Vanna syndrome, says Gen Z's conservatism is fake like it is every generation. It's just a media storyline you can write about without getting out of your chair or picking up the phone. I mean, I've always found generational politics, to not be the best way to view things. Um, Fiddle says, "Do you think Trump's sentencing after the hush money verdict will affect his campaign in any way?" I mean, I think the only way that one of these things is able to affect Trump's campaign is it prevents him from being on the ballot, prevents him from running. If the question is politically, I think that his guys and people supporting him sort of are pretty content. All right. David says the European Greens suck. All they do is blow up nuclear plants. Yeah, I mean, extremely dangerous political party in Europe. But, the connection there, I think, is fairly tenuous to the U.S. Greens. I mean, the German Greens are on a planet-killing operation right now, which is very horrifying. Yeah, and again, I genuinely. Zane says, please talk about what's happening to Gaza under Democrats. I mean, what's happening right now is a massive genocide campaign by Israel, supported by Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and the Democratic Party, as is evidenced. I mean, what happened today is truly unbelievable. Or what's been happening with this very simple demand from the uncommitted movement to say, hey, could you have a Palestinian please speak at your convention? Which to me is just, you think it's standard Democratic Party operating procedure, right? Get such and such from a certain group to say, hey, we like the Dems, it's all good, and move on. But that was too controversial, which is, frankly, and I'll say it. I mean, it's truly something else to not just say, oh, we won't have a representative of your movement speak or blah blah blah. An issue, but something, but to say no Palestinians, right? Like talking about an ethnicity, a nation, right? A nationality. Um, whew, that's something else. I mean, that's extreme. I will say, and I think that what the Democratic Party has made exceptionally clear, and I think a lot of people, certainly Democratic, many parts of the Democratic leadership, lots of people within the media class, and even certain sections of the progressive media class have said, Palestine, might make us feel sad and might make us feel bad what's going on there, but we might have to just ignore it so that we can beat Trump. And I think that that's the calculation a lot of people are making, and it's a really disgusting calculus. It's one of those things, it's bad faith. I mean, I think that you have to operate, um, at least I have to operate under the perspective that most people in the world are good, right? And that most people in the world are good, but a lot of the systems that we live under and a lot of the rules of the game, the games that we play, encourage people to do bad things. And for some folks, I think that they are completely oblivious to what they're doing, or they might be okay with it, or they might have been able to compartmentalize it. But I think a lot of people sort of experience it as like a bad faith existence, in the sense of like, I know what I'm doing is wrong, but I have to do it. I'm sort of being forced to do it. And it creates, so much, I think, personal anguish for folks, which is why you saw with so many of the people who went from condemning Joe Biden for supporting the genocide in Gaza to uh, being complete coconut tree people the second that Kamala Harris takes over, even though there's been no indication that she has any intention of slowing down what's going on. In fact, she might actually have even more. She might have even more incentive to not let it stop until she can end it, right? Um, but all of those people who went from condemning Biden, rightfully condemning Biden for his role in supporting the genocide, who are now saying, "Oh, Kamala is great," I wish she would change her mind, but have to do it. I think that they feel a lot of anguish. A decent amount of them, I'm sure they do, right? Because it's bad faith. It's hard to hold those two things in your head at once. And that's why we're getting so much talk about mental health, right? Oh, the thing is, like, when people criticize Kamala or doing this, they're being dour, and they're not allowing us to experience joy, and they're not allowing us to experience happiness, and they're scolding, and it's preventing us from being able to experience relief that we all desperately need, right? And for me, I'll just say is like you have to find an outlet in your life that is not politics for you to feel joy and happiness and relief. Because in this case, the need to feel that joy and happiness and relief is either either putting your head in the sand about what this party and what this movement that you're a part of represents and the consequences of it for people in Gaza, for people across the globe, right? Or to do this other thing where people are trying to have it both ways, like I support this, but I feel really bad about that, right? It's a tension, and like I don't know, I wouldn't know how to handle that. And I think you can see that in the way a lot of the kind of reactions that we're getting from folks. So I think that we have to always operate under the assumption and have the grace that like most people don't want to support mass slaughter. Most people don't want to support genocide. In fact, you look at that when it comes to the American population, the American people, that's the case. It's these really nasty political parties and institutions that enact something against the vast popular will of this country. And you have to ask yourself, how can we navigate those institutions, right? Live around those. How can we find ways to challenge them, to break them, and to draw this country, to direct this country in a way that's actually governed by the popular will, by what most people support? Which are things like Medicare for all, which are things like higher wages for workers, which are things like ending the destruction and the mass slaughter of women and children and innocent people in Gaza, right? And you have to be able to seriously take on the question of how can we deal with a party like the Democratic Party, which is willing to sacrifice at the altar of history, at the altar of defeating Donald Trump, thousands upon thousands of people in Gaza, people all across the globe, right? And if you really wrestle with that question enough, you have to come to the conclusion that we have to end the stranglehold that that party has and that leadership has on so many American people and political activities, right? And figuring out an institution or the capabilities or the strategy to deal with that is difficult. And I'm not going to sit here and say that I have all the kind of quick and easy answers, but I'll tell you what won't work. It just won't work. This continuation of subservience to the Democratic Party, regardless of how it treats us as American citizens, and certainly it has how it treats people outside of this country, right? There has to be a breaking point. There has to be a capacity of people to say, no, we are not going to participate in this anymore. Either you change how you act or we will move you out of power, remove you from power. How you do that, there's many different roads. But this kind of game that we play every 4 years where we hide our eyes and cover our ears to all of the horrible things that this wedding and marriage to a private institution like the Democratic Party that shows time and time again it doesn't have interest in representing the American people, it doesn't have interest in stopping the genocide, it doesn't have interest in taking on the corporate power in this country. That has to come to an end. And what's very clear is that the strategy of complaining for a year and a half, because you're not allowed to complain about the Democratic Party when you go into the presidential election, because the Republican might win if you criticize them, and you're also not allowed to criticize them in that first year because they just came in power. It's not fair, right? It's mean. Then you're also not allowed to criticize them 2 years in because it's the midterms, and could throw the election to the Republicans. The Republicans would come in and mess everything up, right? This is just a never-ending cycle of how people relate to this party and these people. They have these little windows where they start saying things about them and the reality of it. Something much different needs to happen. All right, I'll take a few more. Joe Snuffy, how's it going, friend? Joe Snuffy says, I'm suppressing the urge to vomit every time someone says joy. It's an unnatural slogan, and you know it's been picked because it promises nothing. Well, I think that's true. I do think that there's a lot of value in, having a kind of optimistic politics, a hopeful politics, right? I'll tell you, as annoying as it is, it's a lot better than the Trump is Hitler kind of stuff. Um, but that's just right there underneath the surface. Um, but I feel you. I feel you a lot, brother. Antonio says, shouldn't a left wing political party be concerned with forming connections with unions and their leadership while both running for office while recruiting sympathetic elected politicians? I would say so. Um, Canal, a judge says, Mr. Griscom, what is a good book on the labor history of the South? I would highly suggest reading Mean Things Happening in This Land, which is H.L. Mitchell's autobiography. I wrote a review of it in Jacobin, which you can check out. I know, obviously, kind of, I don't know off the top of my head one that is specifically labor history just on the South. If there is one, somebody let me know. I know that like there's certain um, episodes, right? Hammer and Hose, another very famous one. But on a particular part of the South and its radical labor history, um, talk about Texas, there might be an interesting book coming out in the near future for you all to read. Socialist, I appreciate the super chat. Says, what do you think about Tim Walz's Cuba policy? I will say I'm not familiar with it, so enlighten me, please. Rod Street Collectibles says, why do you think there wasn't a bigger push to add more members to the squad this election cycle? I think that it's been very difficult to, um, to build out kind of campaigns and to have the funding that's necessary to run them. I mean, uh, I think that the most exciting probably Senate campaign, at least that I can think of, is Osborne in Nebraska. But I think you're onto something that I think there's been a lot of difficulty in sort of maintaining that congressional momentum that we saw in the early Bernie years. Um, and I think we're seeing the difficulty with it. I think there's it's very expensive and hard to run a congressional campaign, and I think people need to take that seriously. I mean, the AOC victory was a massive one, and I think a lot of people miss how that sort of happened. Justice Democrats also played a massive role in this kind of thing, and that's an institution that has sort of shifted priorities. Right? It wasn't all just DSA. And I think that's something we have to be honest with ourselves about. Um, I think it's a lot harder to actually fund kind of left wing progressive political organizations right now than it was in 2017 and 2018. There's a different energy around there, and I don't think that that it's been able to be maintained. And maybe that's me being cynical, but I know I'm a couple minutes behind. Actually, I'm a few minutes behind y'all, so I might go a little bit faster. Sorry if I'm a little rusty on doing these Griscom streams. I'd really do like chatting with y'all, so I hope it's been um, interesting, as difficult as this kind of situation is. Keeping up with the chat here. Very good advice here from a civilian victim of Havana syndrome who says it's easy to not send weapons to Israel. I do that every day. So Socialist says, "What do you think about Tim Walz's policy to sell food to Cuba? It would lift the embargo." I mean, if they want to lift the embargo, I'm all for it. I think that'd be a really great thing. I think that one thing that's so enraging about the Democratic Party under Biden and very clearly under Harris is we got that leak that that she has no interest in renegotiating or reentering the Iran nuclear deal, which made the world, even though that deal, which was, fairly egregious in just how over the top and humiliating it was for Iran, um, but was a massive accomplishment in making the world a safer place. And the fact that Trump ripped it up was monstrous. And then the fact that Joe Biden had no interest in sort of reigniting the legacy that he was a part of as president was so shocking to me. And we're seeing Kamala Harris continue down that track. So, you know, if Walz wants to reinstate Obama's kind of opening up to Cuba, that would be a wonderful, wonderful thing. And hopefully his boss lets him do that. All right, let's see if I'm missing any of these. Byron Man says, something sacrilegious, but I appreciate the chat here. Says, thanks for cooking the DNC. I prefer my steak well done. Shiggity Shank says, is radical change even possible given the scale and power of the state? Yeah, I think it certainly is. I understand the development, like the argument here is that certain kind of technologies have made things more difficult. You know, at the same time, things were really difficult in the 1920s in this country, right? Things were really, really difficult in the 1890s in this country. Back in the day, look, they can check your Facebook account or whatever. They used to just be able to send guys to your house and they would shoot the fuck out of your house. I mean, this is something that the tenant farmers in Arkansas and Louisiana and Texas had to deal with, is that literally whenever they were organizing, oftentimes their bosses, and oftentimes with the blessing of the cops and the sheriff, um, would let the Night Riders or the KKK go by somebody's house and shoot it up, maybe even kill somebody, right? That was difficult to deal with, right? Extremely difficult to deal with. So, there are always going to be challenges to doing anything serious. But I think that to ever sit here and say things are foreclosed, particularly that things are foreclosed because of technology, I think is wrong. And I would also just note, just looking at the character of organizations like the CIA and the FBI today, you know, the best and brightest are no longer going to get jobs in the U.S. government. They're going to Silicon Valley. So, if anything, that might be a little bit of encouragement versus what you saw in the '60s. I didn't. All I saw, I only saw Mike Lindell, no mustache. I didn't see him debating a kid. Um, you know, you can change your look up pretty quickly if you shave off a beard or a mustache. So pretty smart. Um, Goonish Lurker says, "Do you have a take on what's happening with the Real Page's renting, price fixing, and if Real Page will face consequences of keeping high rent prices. I'm not particularly familiar with the story, so I'll keep up with it. But a lot of those institutions are extremely criminal, and that's why private ownership of housing is something extremely dangerous for everyday folks. Stewart says, any thoughts on means testing versus universal programs? I mean, universal programs are infinitely better than means testing. It's just a simple social question, first of all. Well, I mean, the larger question is implementation. Means testing creates all kind of perverse incentives within how goods and services are delivered to people. It creates resentment, right? Because you always have that cliff, right? Oh, I'm on this side or that side of it, and also it divides people. And universal programs are so much better because you can say something like, look at public schools. Those schools belong to us as a community, as a society, versus something that only belongs to a certain subsection. I mean, could you imagine? You could see this, to a certain extent with private education, how public schools are sort of demonized or attacked, but it creates a situation um, where if everybody has to go to the same schools, those schools get a lot better, a lot faster. When rich people have the opportunity to opt out, you can see how they sort of like to cordon the resources off. And then they start saying, oh, maybe we shouldn't be giving so much of our property taxes to local schools. So that's just about whether or not rich people should be able to opt out of programs. Universal programs are significantly better because when you can sort of pit people against each other, it can be very effective at undermining these kind of undermining these kind of programs. So, for example, there's a weird thing going on for a while in the climate movement where, and you saw this start to be developed under the Biden administration, where they want to use these terminologies, frontline communities, right? And well, what that does is it creates a scarcity situation where environmental policy isn't for everybody; it's actually for a particular group of folks. Well, you see how effective the right has been able to use things like that to demonize social programs. Look at things like the welfare queen or things like that. No, you need to have programs be universal, be part of a collective good versus being means tested. It creates so many headaches, and it creates a lot of opportunity for people to use resentment to try to undermine the genuine human solidarity that we all feel to one another. Ooh, Trey, appreciate this. Lumber and labor um, is a great history of the Louisiana Texas timber war. Yeah, no, that's a great. I haven't read that book, but that's definitely a great history for people to get engaged with if they haven't. Very radical interracial efforts at building a unionization in this part of the country. So thank you for that suggestion, Trey. Labor and lumber. Is that not what we said before? Oh, well, yeah, okay, yeah. All right. I'm a little bit behind, so I'm gonna try to get to a couple more. Let's see what we can do. To see what we can do here. Man, that would be something else if the special guest is Zelensky. Oh man, somebody find out if he's doing something today. that would be that would be something else if that was the DNC special guest today. All right, I think I'm getting to the end here. Let me make sure I'm not missing anything. Appreciate Shiggity Shank says, thanks for bringing a little hope to my cynical mind. I mean, I appreciate all of y'all chatting with y'all. I mean, I think that it's a very difficult um, moment, but I think we can't turn to despair. I think that's where a movement like this. I really don't want the democratic socialist moment, this movement that all these people who got activated and engaged in politics in this country, to be a kind of footnote or something that we remember fondly, um, you know, like our flower power years or whatnot. I think that it's serious. I think that there's a real chance. I think that there's a hunger for a different kind of politics in this country, and I believe in it. That's why, I spend time talking to y'all. That's why I spend time doing the research that I do and the writing that I do, because I think that there's a lot out there, and we need to craft the tools and the movements that are capable of doing it. But I think that it's a real possibility. Um, and so you have to have a kind of serious optimism for the future, but also not a kind of childish view of the world, where you need to constantly tell yourself that we're winning when we're not. And I think that that's something in politics that folks can struggle with. All right, I think we're getting close to the end here. I just want to make sure I'm like 5 minutes behind y'all in the chat, so gonna keep up, make sure we're not missing any of these last ones before we go. Jimmy Carter would be amazing too. I mean, Jimmy Carter would be the most likely to call for a ceasefire, right? There we go, from our good friend Social Lust. Seeing Jesse Ventura come out with such support for Waltz and Harris, I have to say, surprised me a little bit. That was pretty fun. I think that's where I gave myself a little joy. But all right, folks, I think that might be it. I think anything else will go on too long and I'll start rambling. So I appreciate all of y'all so much. This weekend, Matt Leck and I are doing another one of our famous Marxist reading series. And in this case, we are reading an excellent essay by the great Hal Draper on lesser evil voting. It's a really fascinating piece, obviously, given the context of what we're going through right now. But it's also really fascinating to read something from 50 years ago almost, and see the parallels to the current moment. I highly suggest y'all listen to that. It'll be out this Sunday for patrons, patreon.com/left reckoning to get it. We'll be back next Tuesday with the main show. As always, feel free to reach out if you have any questions or ideas for something you might want to see us do. I'm trying to keep an eye on the Discord, so get in there. You can send us messages on Patreon. You can send us emails at leftreckoning@gmail.com. And yeah, I appreciate all of y'all very much, and take care, and we'll see you soon.